interessados que forem surgindo no decorrer dos próximos meses aí. Então, inicialmente, falar da pauta do dia. Então, nós faremos realmente uma breve apresentação da rede, especialmente para os tantos que não a conhecem ainda. Teremos, na sequência, a palestra do nosso colega do CIRAIG, François, Saunier, e também um debate. Então, durante a fala dele, vocês já podem colocar perguntas no chat, que eu vou compilando para ele. Na sequência, teremos a apresentação do foco de trabalho do Grupo de Trabalho da Economia Circular da Rede ACV e também dos 2 papers que estamos lançando nessa oportunidade. O evento em si vai demorar 2 horas, ou talvez menos, vai depender também da riqueza de perguntas e debate no final, e aí teremos um encerramento. Da rede, é importante dizer que ela foi criada logo depois da Rio+20, em razão de uma série de manifestos que pediam a orientação ao ciclo de vida na tomada de decisão empresarial, o próprio futuro que queremos, também a visão 2050 do World Business Council, também um manifesto do Pacto Global na época, todos enalteciam a importância da gente considerar os impactos no ciclo inteiro de qualquer coisa na tomada de decisão. Em 2017, a rede adquiriu personalidade jurídica de associação e também a entidade ambientalista pelo Estado de São Paulo. Então, os associados, mantenedores e institucionais são de segmentos totalmente distintos, uma diversidade muito grande de experiências com a condução de estudos de ACV ou com o pensamento de ciclo de vida, com aplicações totalmente distintas também, e é isso que é uma grande riqueza da rede ACV, porque são todas organizações interessadas em discutir esse conceito, né, de pensamento de ciclo de vida para a tomada de decisão. A rede ACV é membro da Life Cycle Initiative das Nações Unidas, que foi criada em 2002 justamente para promover esse pensamento de ciclo de vida. Recomendamos muito que entrem no site, é só colocar no Google, né, Life Cycle Initiative, tem vários cursos, inclusive à distância e gratuitos ali, inclusive em português, graças ao professor Diogo aqui da São Carlos e sua equipe. Recentemente, nós também celebramos uma parceria institucional com a Associação Americana de ACV, que tradicionalmente também promove muitos congressos e é muito atuante. Também com a Fundação EcoInvent, na Suíça. E, recentemente, também obtivemos o OK e somos signatários do Pacto Global das Nações Unidas. A Rede ACV tem como objetivo ser um ambiente de cooperação entre empresas e atores em geral no uso da ACV, que também vise otimizar recursos, evidentemente, à medida que se troca experiência, educar e capacitar empresas e sociedade no conceito, na aplicação e nos benefícios, também disponibilizar informações, então, seja através do LinkedIn, do site ou de eventos como estamos promovendo hoje e das próprias atividades que eu já vou descrever. E, fundamentalmente, também contribuir com a consolidação de um Banco Nacional de Inventários de Ciclo de Vida, que é tão importante para que os estudos executados no Brasil ou que queiram refletir uma realidade brasileira sejam, de fato, representativos e genuínos. A Rede ACV trabalha através de grupos de trabalho, então temos capacitação, comunicação, banco de dados, rotulagem, economia circular, que vamos descrever mais hoje, objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentável, também uma comissão de estudos de metodologias que se debruça no detalhe sobre a compreensão e a execução do que está previsto na norma, e transversal a todos esses temas, uma atuação setorial específica em construção, em finanças e no agro, que são segmentos que demandam toda essa expertise por uma série de razões. A cada 2 meses nos reunimos também, aí todos os associados, para discutir algum tema especial que contribua para alavancar a adoção do pensar ciclo de vida na tomada de decisão pela sociedade. Em 2017, tivemos uma discussão com a Ellen MacArthur Foundation do Brasil, sobre justamente a complementariedade entre economia circular e ACV, que é o que vamos explorar mais hoje. O papel da rotulagem, com a Vanzolini, também a ISO de compras sustentáveis, que a própria definição do que é compra sustentável passa por esse impacto no ciclo de vida, precificação de carbono, e como quem já está orientado ao ciclo de vida tem nisso, né, uma vantagem competitiva. Discutimos a Política Nacional de Resíduos Sólidos, que prevê a responsabilidade compartilhada no ciclo de vida, na própria definição, com a Felsberg, que é a nossa associada e também conselheira. Fontes de financiamento com colegas da KPMG, uma perspectiva global com a Pre-Sustainability e o Renova Calc com a Embrapa, especialmente com a Marília, que também está aqui conosco hoje. Em 2019, o Aaron Belink falou sobre os vários momentos onde o questionário EASY remete ao pensar ciclo de vida, cadeia de valor, enfim, essa responsabilidade mais holística sobre os impactos. Os colegas da TÜV, a Luciana está aqui conosco hoje, falaram conosco sobre a ACV na revisão da 14.001. E o colega Estevão Braga, da BOL, veio falar conosco sobre a experiência da reciclagem, logística reversa da lata no Brasil. Em 2020, falamos no início do ano sobre um estudo de pegada de carbono da carne bovina, que a GV conduziu com JBS, Marfrig e Minerva. Em maio, também pudemos escutar da Ródia, que é do Grupo Solvay, como tem a gestão do portfólio orientada à ACV. Em julho, discutimos a necessidade de uma integração mundial de bancos de inventários, com colegas da Life Cycle Initiative. A professora Cássia falou para a gente, e também convidados da ArcelorMittal, como está o status da ACV social no mundo e no Brasil, evidentemente, e fechamos o ano com a última reunião bimensal em novembro, onde colegas do Itaú CTEA falaram da experiência do Walmart de ter introduzido um programa orientado aos impactos do ciclo de vida, no ciclo de vida de vários fornecedores. Então, são formas que a gente tem de chamar especialistas, sejam associados ou não, mas que tenham reconhecimento nesses temas, que todos conversam com o pensar ciclo de vida e com a ACV concretamente. Agora eu tenho a imensa satisfação de introduzir o François, nosso palestrante neste evento. François ingressou à equipe do CIRAIG como associado de pesquisa em janeiro de 2013. Ele é formado em engenharia química pela École Nationale Supérieure d'Industrie Chimique da França e concluiu o mestrado em engenharia química em Montreal em 2012. Seu trabalho de pesquisa, sob a supervisão do professor Jean Sanson, foi conduzido sobre o desenvolvimento de uma metodologia de avaliação do ciclo de vida prospectiva, aplicado à indústria siderúrgica especificamente. Ele é analista sênior do CIRAIG, adquiriu experiência substancial na realização de estudos de ACV relacionados a vários campos, incluindo mineração e metais, processos químicos, agronegócios, produtos de madeira e edifícios. Ele também está trabalhando com ACV organizacional, indicadores de circularidade e análise de fluxo de materiais. Líder para os projetos relacionados à economia circular e à infraestrutura sustentável. Ele também trabalhou no desenvolvimento de vários cursos sobre ACV e produção sustentável e participa regularmente no treinamento de estudantes de pós-graduação. François, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sonia, for the introduction. So I will share my screen. Just let me know if it's working.
Perfect.
Yeah. So let me know if there is any technical problem during the presentation. So thank you, Sonia, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to discuss with you about circularity and sustainability performance. Maybe I will try to active my camera just for you to see me also. Okay, great. So my name is François Saunier and I'm a senior analyst at the CIRAIG. So in our research center, I'm in charge of the project related to circular economy. So I will try to discuss today a bit about the link between circular economy and life cycle assessment. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat, and we will discuss them at the end. I think that my presentation will be around 40 minutes, so we will have a lot of time to discuss after, and I will enjoy to discuss about this topic with you at the end. So before starting the presentation, what CIRAIG is, the CIRAIG is a research center based at Montreal in Canada. So we are working on life cycle thinking, methods and tools with the purpose of helping to solve the complex challenges of sustainability. So we are trying to apply life cycle thinking methods and tools to a lot of contexts or concepts, and circular economy is one of them. And we are involved in several activities, from training to research project, to also transfer activities. So we are doing a lot of consulting with governments or industries or NGOs. And then we have a communication team when we try to present how life cycle thinking could help in decision making and in all other type of decisions. So today I will come back a little on the general concept of circular economy, just to ensure that we all have the same definition in mind. Then I will discuss the circularity indicators and making the link with LCA. So I assume that you are all familiar with the life cycle assessment, but maybe I will just try to recap briefly what LCA is. Then I will discuss the link between LCA and circular economy, or how to use LCA for circular economy. And I will present the example of used tires to illustrate some of the challenges and aspect of applying LCA to circular economy, and then we could discuss some challenges and having a more open discussion at the end. Though circular economy, it's not a really old concept. I mean, if we looked at the scientific literature, we found some mention of closed economy or closed loop economy late in the 60s and in the 70s. But the really boom around the concept of circular economy is in the 10 last years, with the promotion of the concept by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and then we saw the adoption of this concept by a lot of governments and industries. So in Europe, for instance, there is a whole circular economy agenda that is really driving some policies at the European level. And in several companies, we also are we could also see that circular economy is becoming one of the key strategic key elements in the strategy of some companies. Though we did a few years ago in our research center a review of the concept related to circular economy. It might not be up to date now, since it was done 5 years ago, but there is, I think, really good insight to position the circular economy among other concepts. So if you want to know more about it, I invite you to go read this paper. I think it's a good introduction of what is circular economy and how it could be positioned among other concepts. But if I want to define today what circular economy is, in fact, the first thing that I think you should all know is that there is no single definition of circular economy. And from my experience, I think that each individual organization that is using the term of circular economy is giving it its own definition and its own vision. So a few years ago, some colleagues published a paper on the analysis of the definitions of circular economy that was found in the literature. And it's really diverse in terms of what's circular economy and what is included in this concept. But I think that there is some key elements that we should consider as being the key aspects to define circular economy. The first one is that circular economy is a concept that is in opposition to linear economy. So what's linear economy? Linear economy, it's kind of simplification of current economy, most current activities in the economy, where we are extracting resources, transforming the resources up to the end of life, and at the end there is just a waste that is might not be recovered and reused or recycled. And at all the steps of the life cycle of the resources, there is waste and pollution that occurs. So it's really from extraction to the end of life, and there is not a lot of loops, and there is a lot of waste and all the environmental or social impact that could be related to this type of economy. So it's definitely a simplification of the current economy. It's not fully linear, but I think that if we looked at our economy, most of the time we still have a lot of linear activities. So circular economy is, when we promote circular economy, most of the time it's to opposite to a more linear economy. Then why do we want to have a more circular economy? The two main issues that we found to justify why we want to promote circular economy as the first one, the overconsumption of resources, and the second one is the overproduction of waste. So it's two issues that are looking at the beginning and the end of the current linear economy. The issue of overconsumption of resources, is really simple. We are on a finite planet. We don't have unlimited resources. So if we keep going to extract and extract and extract resources, some days we will be at the end of available resources, and then we will have a problem. So we already know that for some resources, if we keep going at the same extraction rate, we will not have enough resources in maybe 5 or 10 years, depending on the metal and then the minerals. So it's a first issue and a first justification of what we should be more circular. The second one is more at the end of the life cycle. We have a lot of waste. We don't know how to deal with some of them. There is issues of pollution. There is issues of toxicity. There is a lot of issues at the end. So if we could find a better way to use these resources that come at the end of life, then it will help us to solve this issue of overproduction of waste. So the two main issues that circular economy, on my point of view, and most of the definition in literature, why we should go to a more circular economy. So circular economy is seen as a way of decoupling growth from resource extraction. So it's not we are not saying that we don't want to extract anymore, we don't want to consume anymore. It's more a way to propose a new way of consuming resources and keeping the value of the resources that we extracted from the earth. And it's most of the time seen as a strategical response to resource dependency. So for a company, for a government, for a company, if you supply is depending on some critical resources, then if you are keeping the control of your product with a circular business model, then you will be able to recover the resources at the end of life, and you will not depend from a supplier in China or in Australia, where you are not sure that you will be able to have the resources next year or in 10 years. So it's a main justification of circular economy also to be less resource dependent from outside of the company or from outside of the region where you, if we looked at why a government want to promote a circular economy. So how could we make the economy more circular? I think that the first loop, the more easiest loop that we think about is the recycling loop. So we could say that we started to evolve in the last 10, 20 years to a more recycling economy. So we are trying to recover the value, the resources at the end of the life cycle of products, and then try to recycle the waste and reuse them to produce other products. But when we talk about circular economy, it's not just recycling that we are looking at, but it's really developing loops at each time of the product life cycle. So maybe at the end of life, the product is still enough good to be reused by another user. And in this case, it's a better use of the resources to just reuse it instead of recycling and all the impact that could be associated with recycling. No, it was just to introduce circular economy and most of the main elements to have in mind when we talk about circular economy. But in all the definition that we found in the literature on circular economy, there is little mention of systemic shift or sustainability. And I think that it's a missing part that need to be addressed. Sometimes, or most of the time, there is the assumption that if the economy is more circular, it will be better for the environment. But it might not be always the case, and I'm thinking it's something that I want to discuss today. So in Quebec, we have our own view and definition of circular economy, and I think I'd really like it to present what kind of strategies could be developed under the topic of circular economy. And I think that the first type of strategies will be to rethink the product or the service or the activity. So how to reduce resource consumption and preserve ecosystem. So strategy like eco-design, optimization of the operation, responsible consumption will try to consume less resources, or at least maybe have a better choice of renewable resources or other aspects. And then when we know that we have to extract the resources because we need them to make product. So we want to extract the minimum amount of resources that we will need. But then once the resources are extracted, they will be manufactured, distributed, used. But at the end, we want to optimize the use of the resources. So the first level of strategy will be to intensify the product use. So how to reuse the product more and more to ensure that we are making a good use of the resources. Then if the product is not reusable, maybe we could think to extend the life of the product, so repair, refurbished, and at the last loop, give resources a new life. So recycling or maybe all kind of industrial ecology strategies could also be included there. So it was just for an introduction of circular economy. I think that we could have a whole 2 hours just discussing circular economy and what could be included in it. But I think they give you a good overview of how, on my side, I'm defining circular economy and what could be included inside this topic. So why do we need LCA and why do we need circularity indicators? I think that the first justification is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think that we are using LCA to assess the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint of a product because we want to manage the footprint and the sustainability of a product. In the same way, since circular economy emerged a few years ago, some organizations, some universities, a lot of people are trying to develop indicators to measure circular economy and then to ensure that if we want to move to a more circular economy, then we are on the right track. So circularity indicators are there to manage the way that we are going to a more circular economy. But if you already looked at all the indicators that are found in the literature, there is really a huge number of indicators, and they have different scopes and scales that will help us to classify these indicators. In term of scope, the circularity indicators are looking either on the circularity performance or on the effects of circularity. And I will come back on this point just after. It's really the main differences between most of the indicators. The indicators could also be divided between indicator that we looked at the technosphere and indicator that we looked at the ecosphere. And by the technosphere, I'm considering all the human activities, and by the ecosphere, I'm looking at the environment where all these activities take place. So the human-made capital is part of the ecosphere and is part of the technosphere, and then the Earth will be kind of the ecosphere. And in terms of scale, the indicators could look at really different scales. It could be nanoscales, so you will have indicators that will assess the circularity of a product or a substance. So how circular is my table, for example. Then you will have an indicator looking at the micro level, so a portfolio of product, a business unit, an organization. Then you could have a broader scope looking at a city, a region, a nation. And if you try to use an indicator that has been developed to assess the circularity of a region to a product, you might have problems. So some indicators are more have been developed to be applied at the product level or at the macro level, and most of the time they will be really specific to the level, to the scale they have been developed for. So when you want to use a circularity indicator, the first question is to ask, what is the scale of application of my indicator, and then you will have to ask what is the scope of the assessment that I want to make. And as I mentioned before, in terms of scope, there is really two main aspects that could be assessed. The first one is the circularity performance. So the question there will be, what is the degree of circularity of my system, of my product, or of my company? Example of such indicators, for instance, the global circularity percentage published by Circular Economy that say the world is 9% circular. So it's really an assessment of the degree of circularity of the world. You also have indicators such as the MCI from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation or the CTI from the WBCSD. And I will just come back on this indicator after. So with this kind of indicator, it's really, is my system circular or not? And what is the percentage or what is the position of my system between a fully linear system and a fully circular system? And on the other way, you could also develop circularity indicators that will measure the effect of circularity. So how the strategy that I'm developing, that I'm putting in place, will affect the life of my products. And then you could have indicators that we looked at the longevity, the lifetime of the products. So, for instance, the longevity indicators have been developed to looking at the lifetime of a product and comparing lifetime between several development phases of a product. There is a lot of indicators that we looked at specific properties like lifetime of number of use of a product. And in this case, it's really the effect of circularity and not the degree of circularity that you would be assessing. And in this kind of indicators, LCA will be a way to assess the effect of circularity on the environment. So if we look just at some of the indicators, and I try to select a few of them that are the most used in the literature. The first one is the material circularity indicator that has been developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's one of the principal indicators that is used at product level to assess circularity. So how does this kind of indicator work? In fact, they are based on a simplified version of the life cycle of a product. So we have the extraction of feedstock, the manufacturing, the use, and the end of life. And after the use, there is material that are going to landfill or energy recovery, and then there is a part of the product that could be recycled or reused. And then they apply some value on the flows and some coefficients to calculate the circularity of a product. So the circularity of the product will depend on the amount of virgin material that are extracted and the amount of waste that are produced. And the more the V and the more the double V are lower, the better the product will be in terms of circularity. So what we want to do is to minimize the amount of virgin material and the amount of waste that are produced, and have loops of recycling and reusing of the materials, and it will increase the score of the product. So with this kind of indicator, it's a scale between 0 and 1, and 0 is a full circular product, a full linear product, and 1 is a full circular product. So a first brief introduction of what it could mean to use circularity indicators. So at the product level, I think it's one of the easiest one to apply and to understand. And then at the organization level, there is several also indicators that has been proposed to assess the circularity of a company or of business unit, and so. I think that the two main ones that I just want to introduce are the circularity transition indicator that has been developed by the WBCSD. So it's a framework that is looking at several indicators, but the methodology is the same as for the use of other indicators. So you have to determine the scope that you want to assess, then you select the indicator that you want to use, then you collect the data, you calculate the indicators, you interpret the results, and then you identify opportunity to improve, you plan, act, and then you could use again the framework to assess your circularity again and to see if you are improving or not in terms of circularity of your organization or your company. And what's interesting is that this kind of methodology is really similar to the methodology that will be applied if I want to do the organizational LCA of my company, and then I want to improve to reduce the carbon footprint or the water footprint of my company. So it means that as the methodology of this kind of indicator and the methodology of organizational LCA are really aligned, it's easier to apply both of them if you want to keep, if you want to measure both circularity and environmental performance of your company, for instance. If we looked at the indicator that are proposed in this framework, there is an indicator looking at the amount of the level of circularity of the inflow, of the outflow of the water and of the energy that is used by the company. There is indicator that we looked at the percentage of critical material that you are using, the type of recovery at the end of life. So which kind of loop are your product involved in? Is it more closed loop like reused or broader loops like recycling? And then there is a way to calculate the productivity of your company in terms of using materials. So it's really sub-indicators that we looked at specific aspects of circular economy, and I think that you could make the link to specific aspects of the definition of circular economy that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So we will look at the overconsumption of resources, the overproduction of waste, the dependency of the organization to the use of critical materials, the type of loops that are used by the company, and there is also the aspect of energy that is sometimes, not all the time, included in the definition of circular economy, but more and more often we also have the inclusion of, in the definition of circular economy, the inclusion of the fact that it should also promote renewable energy as the source, the main source of energy. Though I will not try to explain all the formulas and how these indicators could be calculated. But if we look just at the two first, circular inflow, circular outflow, I think the main one that are relevant if you want to assess the performance just in terms of pure circularity of your company, it will look at the inflow, and if the inflow of the company is non-renewable or made of virgin resources, then it will be considered as linear, and if you are using renewable or secondary materials, then it will be considered as an inflow, and then if you make the a weighted mass of each circular and linear inflow, you could calculate the percentage of circularity of your inflow. And it's the same kind of reflection that you could make for the end of life, for the end of life of your product, to calculate the circular, the percentage of circularity of the outflow of your company. So another framework that is more developed to be used at the level of a company, of an organization. And then a last framework that I want to mention today is another framework developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that is called Circulytics. And Circulytics is also developed to assess the circularity at the level of an organization, of a company. And what's interesting in this framework is that it will look at both aspects of the performance of your organization in terms of circularity. So what are the outcomes? Are your inflow and outflow circular? Is your use of water circular? Is your energy renewable? So the outcomes part is similar to the WBCSD framework that I just mentioned before, but this framework is also looking at the enablers that the company will have to implement to change his way of doing things and to develop more circularity in the strategy of the company, in the skills, in the R&D processes, etc., etc. No, it's looking at both performance in terms of circularity, but also at how the company is changing its own way of its own activities to be more circular. So it's really interesting, and the framework has been developed in the last 2 years. And what's also interesting is that this first part of the framework is really similar to all companies, but the outcome is adapted depending on the industry classification. So if you are in industry, in the energy sector, or in the raw material extraction sector, or in the service sector, then there is specific question and specific indicators that are proposed in your case to assess the circularity. So it's a better alignment of what could circularity mean for a specific type of industry, and not a generic framework that will be used to all kind of industry in the same time. So yeah, it's just a definition of all these indicators, but I don't have to focus on this. So this brief presentation of 3 indicators was to introduce you to what could be really a good framework that has been developed to assess the circularity at the product or the organizational levels. There is really a lot of indicators in the literature, and there is not yet, I would say, really agreement of what kind of indicator should be used. It's still new, and there is a lot of new indicators that are proposed every week or every month. I think that if you are looking at a good and a recent publication on what kind of indicators could be used for businesses, I just wanted to mention a recent publication by Ciclo Economy, which is a consulting firm in the Netherlands, and they did a good review of the most relevant ones for businesses, and it's also a good introduction of what question you should ask yourself if you want to use circular metrics. in their publication, they classify the indicators in three categories. The first one is headline indicators. So why do we need to change our business? And is it in this part, in this type of indicator, we looked at the percentage of circularity, the share of scarce resources, for example. Then they have the performance indicator that we looked at what should be changed in the value chain. So it's indicator of this kind of indicator would be, for example, recycling rate or other kind. And then there is a process indicator that will assess how can we bring about the required change. So are we giving enough information to the consumer to be part of this circularity? Is there KPI in the company that we looked at this aspect? So how could the company change? So I invite you to look at this publication if you want to use indicator to assess circularity of your business. It's a good start to start the discussion. This was for the the circularity indicators. If we focus now on LCA, so LCA, from my point of view, is really a complementary approach to use when we want to discuss circularity and the sustainability of circular economy. Just to briefly define what LCA is and how it's work. In LCA, what we try to do is to assess the environmental impacts at all the life cycle stages of a product or services. So we will look from the resource acquisition to the end of life, to what we looked at what's happening in the life of the product, what are the related activities, and what could be the potential impact associated to this activity. So it's really all the processes associated with the product, wherever and whenever they might occur. So if we are extracting resources in Japan to be used in Brazil to manufacture a product that will be sent in Mexico, then we are really trying to follow the resources and the life of the product over the globe. So really a systemic view. And for each process, we are assessing the relationship of the process with other processes in the technosphere and the interaction of the processes with the environment. So is the process is extracting natural resources, and then is the process is emitting something to the air, to the water, or to the soil. And with this unit evaluation of each processes implied in the life cycle of the product, then we could make kind of a bilan of all the inputs and the outputs that will be necessary for the life of our products. So I will know that for the production of, for the use of a car, I have been extracting iron ore that is used for the manufacturing of the car. I have been extracting crude oil that is used for the use of the car, and then there are emission of CO2 at the use phase. There are emission of, I don't know, also particulate matter at the use phase, etc., etc. Now, based on this first assessment, then we have a list of all the interaction of our product with the environment, and then we want to be able to compare this flow and it's not easy to do it without a modeling of the impact. So if I want to compare a product that is emitting a lot of CO2 with a product that is emitting a lot of NOx, I don't know how to do it. So that's why we developed in LCA a framework to assess the impact of the product. So we are converting the elementary flow, the pure emission of or acquisition of natural resources, to indicators that we looked at several environmental aspects, and could be damage categories. So we could regroup all the impacts, all the indicators in terms of area of protection. That could be the human health, the ecosystem quality, and the resources. It's most of the time the main one that we will saw in terms of area of protection in LCA. And there is also the option to go to a single score, but it's not the topic for today. And just to let you know, if you are not familiar with LCA, that LCA is standardized. There is a ISO framework, and there is also a lot of other guidelines on how to do LCA. So it should be, if you want to apply LCA, you should follow all these guidelines, and there is really a good way to frame the way of applying all these concepts. But there is still a lot of methodological choices to do, and I think that transparency is really a key element when you are publishing or discussing LCA results. So why do we want to use LCA for circular economy? In fact, most of the time, sometimes, circularity and environmental impacts are not going in the same direction, or there is parameters to keep in mind when you want to assess, or when you want to have a better circular product. Is this product better in terms of sustainability? Not sure, not always the case, maybe sometimes the case, but it's really something a question to ask, and not suppose that it will be the case all the time. And if we looked at the framework that has been developed for assessing circularity, it's in most of the framework you will find mentioned that you should use other tools to assess the sustainability of the product, and then the company or that is applying the circularity framework should also include indicator that we looked at the emission of CO2, that we looked at the amount of water used, that we looked at the energy, that we looked at natural resources. So it's something that is there. I think that the people that develop the circularity indicator, they know that their indicator are not looking now at the sustainability, at most of the sustainability aspect, and that they recommend to use other tool to assess these aspects. So that's why using LCA to assess the environmental impacts of a product of an organization, it's a good complementary tool to circularity indicators if you are applying circularity to also improve the environmental impact of your product or of your organization. So we mentioned before that circularity indicators could look at the technosphere or the ecosphere. So indicator that looked at the technosphere, we will really assess the circularity performance of the product. And then we will use LCA to assess the environmental impacts of circular economy. So the effects of circular economy, of the effect of circularity strategies to the ecosphere. And if we looked at the ecosphere, there is two aspects that we want to measure. There is the stock of resources. So are my strategies preserving the stock of resources? And for this in LCA, we have a resource indicator that could look at this aspect. And then there is indicator that we looked at prevention of pollution reservoirs. So it would be all the other LCA indicators, such as climate change, acidification, eutrophisation, toxicity, that we looked at the effect of circularity on the pollution reservoirs. So how to combine LCA and circularity indicators? I like to present results when I am using these two tools to assess the performance of circularity strategies. I like this type of diagram where you have the circularity of the product in this first axis, and then you have the improvement of environmental impact of the second axis. Though in terms of circularity, if we have a better circularity of the product and an improvement of the environmental impact, we are in a win-win situation with our strategy. And if we are degrading the circularity of the product and degrading the environmental impact, then it's a lose-lose situation. So in these two parts of the diagram, it's easy to understand if we are in the good direction or not. And then there is two parts of trade-off in our diagram. So if we are improving circularity but degrading the environmental impacts of a product or of our organization, then there is a trade-off on the environmental impact. So yes, we have more circular products, but maybe not more sustainable product. And then on the other way, we could improve the environmental impacts of a product, but degrading the circularity of the product. So in this case, it's more trade-off on circularity. Now, I used a case study that we did a few years ago on used tires to illustrate how we could use such a framework to assess both circularity and environmental impacts of some strategies. So in this case study, we used the MCI from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to assess the circularity indicator, and we use VCP endpoint indicator to assess the environmental footprint. And I will also discuss what will happen if we use the VCP resource indicator to assess the circularity instead of circularity indicators. The case study is on the end of life of tires that are used in Brazil on trucks. So the idea was to test two kinds of strategy that could be applied to the tires at their end of life. The first one is regrooving. And with regrooving, there is an increase of the lifetime of the tire of 30%, and there is a decrease of fuel consumption of the regrooved tire by 5%. So it's on the paper, it seems to be a really good strategy where we are expanding the lifetime, and then the new regrooved product is lighter than the baseline, so we also have a decrease of fuel consumption. And then there is retreading. In the retreading strategy, the extension of the lifetime is higher than in the regrooving strategy, so it's 50% more kilometer that could be that the truck the tire could be used. But there is also an increase in fuel consumption by a little less than 7% compared to the baseline because the retreated tire will not have the same rolling resistance and other performance than the baseline tire, so the tire in its first life. We used LCA and the material circularity indicator to assess the performance of both strategies. If we looked at the LCA for the baseline scenario, so the first life of the tire, we have this type of results. There is the impact related to the production of the extraction of the raw material that will be used to produce the tire, so the rubber, the carbon black, and all the steel and all the other material that will be used to produce the tire. Then in the small green, it's the impact related to the manufacturing of the tire. And then there is the use phase. So during the use phase, there is a part of the petrol that is used by the tire, by the truck, that will be attributed, that will be allocated to the tire because it's because of the weight and the resistance of the tire that the truck need to use this amount of fuel. So most of, for 2 of the 3 main indicators that we are assessing in LCA, the use phase is the more contributing, but for the ecosystem part, the production of the raw material, that will be a natural rubber, synthetic rubber, and other aspects is also an important contributor to the environmental impact of the product. So this is for the baseline. And then what we did in this study is to assess the effect of the true strategy that I showed you before on the impact of the tire. So I show you here the results in terms of relative score compared to the baseline scenario. So how should you read this kind of a diagram? It's all the negative score are an improvement of the environmental impacts, and the positive are a degradation of the environmental impact. So if we looked only at the human health part, with the regrooving strategy, we have an improvement of the impact of the product for the raw material production phase, for the use phase, but at the end of life, we have a little higher impact of for this stage. That will be the activity necessary for the regrooving. And if we looked at the retreading, then we have an improvement in terms of raw material production because we will need less material to produce the tire per functional unit. And then there is an improvement also in terms of manufacturing. But as I mentioned before, there is a higher fuel consumption. So there will be an higher impact for the retreading scenario in the use phase. And also the impact of the end of life. So if we do the summary of the improvement, for the regrooving, the net result is negative. So there is really a improvement on the environmental impacts. But for the retreading scenario, the net result is positive. So it's higher environmental impact with this scenario on the human health indicator than in the baseline scenario. We did the same comparison for the ecosystem indicator, and in both cases, it's an improvement of the performance. And for the resource indicator, there is improvement in the regrooving case strategy for the regrooving strategy, and degradation for the retreading strategy. And then if we are assessing the material circularity, we are using the MCI to assess the circularity of the product. For both strategy, we are there is an improvement of the MCI. So the score is higher, closer to 1. And so it means that both strategy, if we are only using the circularity indicator, will appear to be good because they will present an improvement of the circularity performance of the tire. So based on all these results, we could use the framework that I showed you before and position the two strategies. So for the retreading, we have an improvement of environmental impact in terms of ecosystem quality indicator, but higher footprint in terms of human health, and then the grooving could be there, and both scenario will improve the material security. And we saw with this kind of diagram that both scenario improve the circularity of the tires, but there is a potential trade-off there between environmental and circularity performance for this scenario. So it's really important to assess the environmental performance of a product when we are applying circularity strategies, but it's also important to assess the performance on several indicators. So if we had only looked at the ecosystem, we would have said that, okay, there is an improvement, it's good. But if we looked at other environmental indicators, then on the human health is not the case for both scenarios. And I think there is a message also that now we saw more and more calculation of the carbon footprint of some circularity strategies, and it's saying, okay, it's a amelioration of the carbon footprint, an improvement of the carbon footprint. So it's good to apply the circularity strategy. But I think that we should also, with a life cycle thinking in mind, trying to apply other LCA indicators to circularity strategy, because maybe it's better for the greenhouse gas emissions, but maybe not the case in all the indicators. So this example shows the importance also to have several indicators when you want to assess the environmental performance of a product. And what's interesting in this case study is that we also try to use the LCA resource indicator as an indicator to assess the circularity. As we mentioned before, one of the main objectives of circular economy is to have a lower resource extraction, and the resource indicators in LCA is looking at the amount of resources that are used by the product. So maybe we could just use just LCA indicators and not circularity indicators, and also discuss the effect of strategies on both circularity and environmental impact. And in this case, if we are using the LCA resource indicator to assess the circularity, then for the retreading scenario, there is no improvement overall of the consumption of resources. So we are showing that this kind of resources, this kind of strategy might not be an help to answer the issue of resource extraction. And why does it differ a lot between the use of the MCI and the use of LCA resource indicator? I think that the main explanation is what the indicators are looking at. And with the MCI or the CTI and other circularity indicators, we are only looking at the foreground system. So we are not looking, for instance, at the amount of fuel that will be used by the tire. And in the case of LCA, we are looking at both foreground and background systems. And in this case, we could also integrate in the assessment the fact that the tire will have a higher fuel consumption. So it's really a different view of the indicators, and it's interesting to have this in mind. So just to finish my presentation, I think that there is a lot of questions, so I just want to be brief. I'm not saying that LCA is easy to apply to circular economy and that it should always be the solution when you want to assess the performance of the product. There is a lot of challenges in using LCA in the context of circular economy. It could be on how to consider loops in LCA. LCA has been developed where the linear economy was the norm, so it's easy to apply to a linear product, but when there is loops, there is choices to do, and there is a lot of methodological choices that should be made. There is the question of multifunctionality that is really important in LCA and should be addressed. There is the eternal debate between consequential and attributional approaches that could apply. And there is also a lot of improvement to do on the resource indicator in LCA. It's not a perfect indicator, and I think that it's something that we also should have in mind when we are using these indicators. And the last point I think that is really important is that when we are applying LCA to a circularity scenario, most of the time is prospective scenario. So we don't know how the consumers will react to the new business models. So there is a lot of uncertain assumption, and it's something that should be addressed in the LCA. I think that if you want to discuss it more during the discussion, I will be happy to discuss it with you. I think there is a good publication from SCORE SCDA. It's only in French, but if you are fluent in French, you could look at this publication. It's a good discussion on some of the challenges in using LCA in the context of circular economy. So just to conclude my presentation, I think that there is trade-off between maximization of material security and minimization of life cycle impact. These trade-offs exist and have to be taken care of when implementing circularity strategies. Circularity performance indicators are relevant, but should not be used alone. And LCA offers good complementary indicators to assess the performance of circular economy. In my mind, what's to come in terms of LCA and circularity indicators and circular economy in general? Maybe just to open also the discussion to what should be the next step of all this linking between LCA and circular economy. I think the first thing that I think that will come in the next months, years, is a better clarification of the circular economy concept. So we start to see that a lot of companies and governments are adopting the concept, and they are proposing definition of the concept. So I think that when all kind of actors will have their own definition, maybe they will be some of converging to maybe more common concept of definition, or at least it will be clear to what circular economy means for everyone. Then I'm sure that there will be more and more indicators to measure circularity, but I hope that the most relevant or user-friendly one will arise and will be the one that will be the main used. We start to saw that sustainability is integrated in the frameworks of circularity assessment. So both Ellen MacArthur Foundation, World Circular Business Council, and other actors that are developing circularity framework are trying to add circularity indicators or try to add environmental impact indicators or sustainability indicators in their framework. So I think that in the next year, we will also see framework that are already integrating LCA or other related indicators in the main framework to assess circularity, and it will not be as now, or you are doing the LCA on one side and the circularity assessment on the other side, and then combining the results. We start to see in the scientific literature and in more gray literature, more and more case studies. So I think it will be really helpful to discuss the effect of circularity on sustainability, to have all these case studies to illustrate these aspects. And I think that we will see also other white paper and position papers illustrating the power of life cycle thinking. And I think that the paper that will be launched today are a good example of how to promote the use of life cycle thinking to assess the performance of circular economy. So it's really a step in the good direction to promote these aspects and to ensure that circular economy will not have negative impact on the environment and social aspects. So thank you for your attention. I just want to finish on a citation of Joseph Stiglitz that what you measure affects what you do. So if you don't measure the right thing, you don't do the right thing. So if you want to apply circular economy to improve the environmental performance of your product, then you have to assess the environmental performance and not only the circularity performance of your product. So that's maybe the key message that I wanted to have today. So thank you for your attention, and I'm there for questions. So Sonia, Leonardo, I think that let me know if there is a question in the chat that we could discuss.
Thank you, François. Yes, indeed, there are questions, and thank you so much for this lesson. We learned a lot today with you and hope to continue learning in the future. We had one hand raised, in fact, by Richard Nixon, but I don't know if he's okay with what you explained afterwards, or if he would like to. In any case, I would ask everybody to be brief in the question, please, because we still have to talk, of course, about the launch of the papers. So, Richard, você quer falar ou a sua pergunta já foi respondida? Não te escutamos. Se você está aí falando, eu tenho que abrir o microfone. Okay, so maybe we go ahead with the next question. In fact, it was a question regarding the study you just mentioned, whether it's public, and we said yes. Yvan already answered here in the chat. It will in fact address additional aspects to this publication in our position paper, which will be described by Leonardo next. Alguém mais tem alguma pergunta ou gostaria de deixar para o final? Agora é o momento. Levantem a mão ou abram o... Ah, Thaís, pode falar, querida.
Oi, boa tarde. Dá para ouvir?
Sim.
Should I ask in English or Portuguese? What's better?
In English, it will be better for me.
Sure. Thanks so much for the presentation. I thought it was really good. There's a lot of content for me to catch up on studying. But one thing that I was thinking is that in Brazil, it's very difficult to associate circularity with the reality. So whenever we do life cycle assessments, usually it's better, well, from my point of view, it's better to take the real data, for example, for waste selection and that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, we have really bad data. So for example, in Brazil, only 2% of, less than 2%, in fact, of our solid waste are actually recycled. And that really takes, so when you take that to a corporate level, that it's very difficult for us to understand, okay, so how can I improve my packaging for it to be more circular, so it can integrate in the circular economy? And I'm looking to recyclability, but also at the same time, I'm located in a country that I know that probably this waste won't end up in the recycling stream. So I think, like, what I wanted to know from your perspective is, how can we play with this kind of factors, the reality of the waste stream, but also like the potential. So as I improve material design, I can reinsert it into the waste stream. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I think that I understand. I think that the main answer there will be that when you will assess the circularity of your company, of your product, you will in fact show that at the output part of your company, of at the end of life of the product, there is a really low circularity because there is a low recovery of the product. So then you should ask what kind of strategy could be applied to improve the recovery of the product at the end of life. And in the circular economy world, there is a lot of strategy that could be applied. So maybe if you want, and I think it's the key aspect in circular economy is that you are not alone responsible for the environmental performance of your product. It's you, but you are producing a product that would be used by another company or would be used by a consumer, and then it's how the consumer will use and deal with the product at the end of life that will affect your performance. So maybe the action to have is not to rethink your product, but maybe to think, how could I train the consumer to have a better use or better disposal of the product at the end of life? Could I develop a circular business model, such as a functional performance economy? Or there is a lot of strategy that could be used to ensure that you will recover the product at the end of life. So if you sell a service instead of a product, then maybe you could keep the control of the product and recover the material at the end of life. So there is a lot of things, but clearly one of the main challenges in circular economy is that we start to understand that a company is not alone in the value chain of a product, and the old way of doing LCA is like, okay, we know that the recovery at the end is 10%, so we will use 10%, and then we are not asking that it could change. But in circular economy, what we realize is that we should try to change what is the main parameter in the life cycle of the product, and maybe the recovery at the end of life. So how could I work with other actors in the life cycle to improve this? I think it's really the key question to have in mind in such example.
Yeah, I think there are some companies and some initiatives down here about assessing the recyclability of materials, and I think that's a good start, to find specific points in the waste stream that we can act. Thank you.
Welcome.
Tiago, you raised your hand.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Good morning. I don't know how. Where are the rest of the people here? I guess they are in Brazil. Hi, François. Very nice to meet you, and thank you for the presentation. It was really amazing, a lot of learning. My question is, I've been working with life cycle assessment for so many years, and since the beginning of the discussions here in Brazil about circular economy, it always bothered me and other people that work with sustainability, the lack of a metric. And you brought us some really interesting metrics that are being developed by the community of circular economy. I guess you know that there's a discussion for ISO normalization for circular economy right now, and the discussion is really strong on about this metrics and the LCA supporting it. So my question is, in a broader way, does circular economy really needs LCA to improve the circularity, or we are talking about two different things? As LCA is more a complementary tool, or is a crucial tool to circular economy?
I think it's really depend on how you are you want to do circular economy. If you are just looking at circular economy as a way to improve the environmental impact or solve the climate change problem, then you will need more LCA than an indicator of circularity, because what you want to improve is the sustainability of your product, your organization, and not just saying I'm circular. But if you want to assess the dependency on virgin resources of your company, then circularity indicators could be useful. I'm not saying that they are not useful, but the main question is really to how do I want to implement circular economy? And if I want to implement circular economy because there is a huge attraction from finance to fund circular economy companies and funds, I think it's good to use the circular economy metrics, because you will talk to the public that want to this kind of information, saying that my company is circular, give me money to invest in more circular activities. So it really depends on what kind of indicator or message you want to have. For my point of view, the environmental impact are the main focus to have. So for me, LCA is crucial, but it depends on why you want to assess your performance. And there is a lot of reasons, and all of them are good, in fact, but it's really depends on the objective of your assessment.
François, there are still 2 questions in the chat. Can you stay a few minutes with us and maybe answer them while Leo starts talking about the working group? Would that be okay?
Yes, it's fine. I'm sorry I took more time than expected on the presentation, but I hope that you will still have enough time to present your good position papers.
I told you yesterday that you had 2 hours to talk about.
Yeah, it's fine. I will answer the question in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to my presentation then. Léo, você quer assumir?
Pode compartilhar, Sônia.
Não, digo, assumir a fala. Continuar falando.
Estou falando já. Fica à vontade. Você quer que eu compartilhe a apresentação? Ótimo, obrigado. François, I'll make the presentation in Portuguese. Sorry about that, but we've been speaking a lot, so you probably will understand most of it since you are French speaker, so a lot of similarities there, okay? Pessoal, eu não vou querer tomar muito tempo de vocês, como eu até respondi o François no chat, a ideia aqui era que ele falasse mesmo. Quando a gente criou o grupo, o GT de Economia Circular, e a gente sabe que a economia circular chegou aqui forte, como em qualquer lugar do mundo, né, com uma demanda muito forte para quem trabalha em empresa, de aplicá-la, a Rede ACV falou, poxa, como é que a gente faz agora? O que significa isso? Como é que ela conversa com a ACV, né? Então, a gente criou um grupo que começou a estudar, a tentar entender essa relação. E aí, o objetivo principal desse GT foi exatamente o título, né, desse webinar, que é promover a complementariedade, né, das propostas de economia circular e ACV. E ainda muito na linha da pergunta do Thiago, né, eu gosto muito dessa forma como como são apresentados os ODS, porque essa é a nossa diretriz. A gente, inclusive, na rede tem o GT, a ODS, né? E ela foi feita pelo Instituto de Estocolmo de Resiliência, que mostra que a biosfera, né, ela é a base para uma sociedade equânime, diversa, democrática, e que nos permite que é promovida por meio de uma economia, né? A gente falando da economia circular, né? Mais circular, uma economia melhor, sendo então um meio para essa sociedade e não um fim em si. E aí a gente tem o 17, né? O ODS 17, que tem a ver com as parcerias, né? Então a rede trabalha muito nessa linha, né? E essa é a diretriz que nos move. Pode passar, Sônia? E aí dentro desse processo de economia circular, a gente busca, então, nós buscamos estabelecer alguns objetivos específicos. Então, primeiro é compreender, né, como é que isso está acontecendo no mundo e principalmente no Brasil. Discutir entre nós, são mais de 40 participantes do grupo, de várias empresas, de vários tamanhos, de vários setores. O que a gente aprendeu, o que a gente levou ferro, né, o que a gente apanhou tentando aplicar a economia circular e a ACV. E comunicar e dar destaque para aqueles brasileiros, né, também. Sempre com o objetivo da rede de disseminar a ACV. Então, a gente entendendo como a ACV entra nesse mundo de economia circular, né? E aí a gente também teve a ideia de buscar ambientes, entrar em ambientes de debate, porque a gente viu que os eventos de economia circular não falavam muito em ACV e os eventos de ACV não estavam falando muito em economia circular, né? Então, esse foi um trabalho também do GT, que aí começou a participar de vários eventos, tanto promovidos pelas empresas em economia circular, mas também promovidos pela academia na questão do ACV. Pode passar, Sônia? E aí a gente quebrou muito a cabeça, foram 2 anos, várias reuniões, vários workshops, no qual tiveram participações desde a Ellen MacArthur até segmentos, setores do aço, inclusive palestras do próprio François, e aí a gente meio que achou um caminho, pelo menos para entender o que a gente acredita como rede, que seria essa complementação entre ACV e economia circular, né? E aí é o seguinte, a gente criou um position paper, são 2 páginas, tem um relatório de background que também passa todo esse conteúdo e esse referencial bibliográfico a partir do qual nós construímos essa nossa concepção, né? E depois também estamos, né, publicando hoje e estamos publicando hoje também o white paper, né? E a ideia é o seguinte, é um conceito dinâmico, né? E a gente tem que estudar muito assunto, né? Eu coloquei até essa frase aí do Milton Santos, porque quando a gente fala em economia circular, a gente meio que já tem uma associação, cada um acha o que né? Cada um tem o seu conceito de economia circular e cada um fala que faz economia circular de um jeito, né? E a gente sabe desde que foi criada a metodologia científica que a nossa percepção nos engana. Então, aqui o nosso primeiro ponto do position paper é que a gente precisa ler, é um conceito em construção, e mesmo o nosso position paper é algo dinâmico em construção e que está aberto para críticas e também evolução e debate, né? Eu acho que essa que é a ideia da rede, é promover esse debate de como que essas 2 ferramentas elas podem ajudar uma a outra. Pode passar, Sônia? E aí, eu só repeti um pouco do que o François colocou lá na apresentação dele para reforçar. Você pode ir passando todos os bullets para a gente ganhar um pouquinho de tempo, né? Mas, assim, é difícil conceituar, foi difícil para nós adotamos no nosso position paper 2 conceitos, um, obviamente, da Ellen MacArthur Foundation, que também está no padrão, no British Standard 8001, e outro que na verdade, a proposta daquele artigo que foi citado na apresentação do François, né, no qual busca englobar os conceitos da economia circular na sua essência em si, considerando também, tentando fazer o link com a questão do desenvolvimento sustentável. Pode passar, Sônia? E então, assim, né, a CV e a EC a gente está junto, né, e como que a gente acredita que a economia, como que a CV entra no âmbito da economia circular e vice-versa, é um pouco de toda essa apresentação que o François fez, né, e quando ele fez essa apresentação no nosso GT, ele abriu nossos olhos para essa questão, então a gente acredita e a gente se posiciona assim, de que a avaliação de ciclo de vida, ela ajuda gente a entender e fazer um diagnóstico dos pontos críticos ao longo da vida do meu produto, do meu serviço, né? E a partir daí, sim, eu posso pensar em alguma estratégia de circularidade e possivelmente atacar onde realmente eu possa mitigar ou a questão do sobreconsumo, que foi apresentada pelo François, ou mesmo a pressão, né, de geração de resíduos, no caso, né, de impactos na ecosfera, como foi falado. E aí, a gente pensa também que se você já fez um estudo de economia circular, você também pode usar para comparar, bom, eu melhorei ou não a questão em relação aos impactos ambientais. Aí usar realmente a questão comparativa da ACV entre um cenário e outro, né? E isso a gente, inclusive, já fez no âmbito do PC com um estudo muito interessante aí no caso de refrigeradores. Pode passar, Sônia? E sim, é complexo, né? Não adianta. Fazer ACV é complicado, a gente trabalha muito forte para comunicar melhor, para tentar simplificá-la, mas na hora que a gente fala em economia circular, a gente está falando de cenários futuros, né? Que tem muita incerteza, e a gente ainda entra já nos termos da ACV em si, se a gente vai fazer uma ACV atribucional, consequencial, ou seja, o que é melhor. Mas, por outro lado, Sônia pode seguir o bullet, a EC também, devidamente contada, ela é muito complexa, né? A gente está mexendo muito com questões que envolvem uma mudança em sistemas, né? E aí, como que a gente garante que isso, ou pelo menos como a gente tenta evitar os impactos decorrentes deles, né? Sociais e ambientais. Pode passar, Sônia? E pode passar mais um bullet aí já. E essa complexidade não deve gerar, ou não deve significar uma inação, né? A gente tem que aceitar a complexidade, é mais fácil com amigos, colaboradores, e aí o âmbito de discutir isso com várias empresas, com várias pessoas, com muitas perspectivas, é isso que a gente quer e a gente busca no âmbito do GT, e isso a gente coloca também no position paper, tá? E aí, bom, para falar um pouquinho do white paper, é mais um teaser, né? O Thiago, da ACV Brasil, foi o coordenador desse trabalho, no qual participaram várias empresas e também, né, associações governamentais que estão aí colocadas, no qual a gente tenta colocar estudos de caso, a gente coloca estudos de caso sobre aço, alumínio, construção, segmento de eletroeletrônicos, papel, plástico e têxtil, né? E aí eu vou deixar, quando o Thiago voltar em janeiro, a gente está pensando já no âmbito do GT de Economia Circular, criar webinars específicos com dois ou três temas correlatos, porque a gente viu que a discussão é densa e tem que ser densa, né? Para que a gente consiga realmente dar um passo firme em direção ao que a gente busca. Pode passar, mas em linhas gerais, esse white paper já está, né? Estará disponível, se eu não me engano, amanhã, né, Sônia, no nosso site, mas o que a gente pode já tirar de conclusões desses estudos, e aí você pode já seguir todos os bullets, é que a ACV realmente indica, né, os pontos, obviamente, mais relevantes, que já foram mencionados. A implantação de práticas circulares levam geralmente a ganhos ambientais, sim, mas nem sempre, por isso que é importante a gente entender isso, colocar uma ferramenta como a ACV, não necessariamente que seja a ACV, mas claro que a gente pensa muito na ACV para isso, e a circularidade como meta ela estimula, né? Assim, ela realmente ela gera uma sensação de inovação, de que o assunto e que o grande quebra-cabeça do desenvolvimento sustentável ele está resolvido. E não está, né? Mas ela gera essa esperança que a gente precisa, né? Para que a gente consiga aí até 2030 promover realmente as melhorias necessárias para um mundo com 9,5 bilhões de pessoas aí, né? Com uma qualidade de vida adequada para todos, né? E obviamente que a gente precisa muito evoluir, então isso também já foi temas de discussões dentro da rede ACV com a ACV social, né? Tanto a ACV quanto a economia circular, a gente precisa entender um pouco como é que essas ações e como é que esses impactos impactam toda a questão social que está no meio, né? Então, basicamente era isso, agradeço aí a todos a minha fala e deixo aberto para fazer perguntas, não só para mim, sugiro que vocês aproveitem também o François, ok?
Perfeito, Léo, obrigada. Pessoal, a gente tem 5 minutinhos, 10, para fazer perguntas ainda, contribuições, comentários, fiquem à vontade. Só levanta a mão para a gente ter uma ordem aqui. Por exemplo, onde estarão disponíveis esses estudos, Léo?
Saunier, você pode responder, né? É só entrar lá na rede, no site da Rede ACV, que foi, já tem um mês de idade, né? E lá você vai ter não só esse nosso estudo de caso, como vários estudos de caso que foram colocados pelas empresas que são associadas em ACV.
Eu estou copiando aqui o link. Isso, obrigada, Bia. Foi mais rápida.
A Bia, como, né, uma das criadoras do site, vai saber o perfeito caminho aí.
E um detalhe também que vai estar em português e em inglês, né? Como é o site todo, inclusive. Perguntas? Acho que está todo mundo querendo ler os papers primeiro para daí fazer perguntas qualificadas, Léo.
Ótimo. Não, a gente está à disposição, né? Foi um trabalho a 80 mãos, pelo menos, aí, com revisão do François, inclusive. Então, a gente acredita que tem um documento sólido, mas que, obviamente, sempre tem espaço para melhorar.
Então, se não tem perguntas aqui ainda, talvez vocês se animem, temos alguns minutinhos. A gente gostaria muito de agradecer a participação de todos. Foi um evento que a gente fez dessa maneira, aberta e virtual, pela primeira vez. Gostaríamos muito de ouvir de vocês o que vocês acharam. Então, a gente também bolou um formulário de satisfação. É muito importante que vocês respondam. Comentários são super bem-vindos. E uma frase que o François falou aqui, you are not alone. Então, esse you are not alone significa que temos que olhar e estreitar aí laços e parcerias com vários atores. É o ODS 17 na veia, que o Léo já falou, que a rede tem toda a vocação para ser esse articulador de parcerias e aproximar atores que não entram em contato, talvez de forma espontânea ou naturalmente. Então, aqui tem alguns contatos, e-mail, entrem no site, no perfil da rede. Por favor, respondam à pesquisa de satisfação, que eu já vou colocar aqui o link no chat. A gente também vai mandar por e-mail para vocês. Quanto antes responderem, melhor, porque daí ainda os comentários e as sugestões estão fresquinhas na cabeça. Obrigada aqui pelos elogios no chat. Mas, por favor, entrem realmente no formulário e enfim, fiquem à vontade de comentar e sugerir melhorias para o próximo. A gente, começando o ano que vem, já deve lançar um white paper da Comissão de Estudos de Metodologias, o Edivan, que está aqui, ele que está compilando o resultado de várias reuniões que tivemos no decorrer do ano, sobre a experiência concreta das empresas na condução de estudos e também na verificação de estudos de ACV. O quanto que a norma é clara e como as empresas têm executado estudos para serem fiéis às recomendações da norma. Então, fiquem atentos que a gente deve ter um evento aí, provavelmente em fevereiro, dessa entrega da comissão de estudos, que é coordenada pela KPMG e pela Ciclo. De resto, não sei, alguém tem mais alguma pergunta, gente? Agradecer ao François. François, thank you so much for being with us. It was really very rich, everything you said. I believe that many colleagues here will be watching the video over and over again. Thank you so much. Can we share your presentation? That was also a question which was risen.
Yes, I will send you another version of the presentation to be shared. And thank you for the opportunity of presenting our work. And feel free to send me question if there is anything that you want to discuss. I think it was mentioned in the chat that the case study that I used is in a scientific paper that was published a few years ago. So you could also look deeper in this case study.
Great, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, François. Thank you very much. And we look forward to hearing from you and also updates on your studies. So please be reassured that we'll be inviting you many times on the next year. So have a great year. Happy Christmas, and also a nice holidays with your baby. Yeah?
Thank you. Happy holidays to all of you.
Obrigada, pessoal. Se cuidem. Bom descanso aí. Boas
Valeu,
festas.
Sônia. Um abraço a todos.
Obrigada.
Boas festas. 2021, tamo junto.
Tamo junto.
Mm-hmm.